My name is Avraham Weissman. Recording is in progress. That's always good to know. I won't do much for introduction to me. You can, if you're interested in who I am, you're certainly welcome to look me up. You'll find it on my English name, Lee Weissman. There's lots of things about me. I do a lot of interfaith and a lot of stuff related to Breslov and to other teaching. I was a teacher in Jewish schools for about 30 years. And I'm not going to say I'm a Breslover chassid. I'm going to say I'm a Breslov enthusiast. I'm an aspiring Breslover chassid. I think that most people who, most of us aspire to that, realizing that we often fall short. So I don't want to talk a lot about Rebbe Nachman because I want to teach some of his teachings tonight. But Rebbe Nachman lives in the Ukraine. And he died at the age of a very young age, really, of tuberculosis at the age of 38. He was the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, was the founder of the Hasidic movement. And he was a very original teacher. I think everybody would agree that even within the Hasidic movement, although of course his teachings are really based on Hasidic philosophy, based on Kabbalah, like all Hasidic philosophy, he had a very unique approach to Hasidut. The result of that has been that Breslov has kind of taken off in ways that I think other kinds of Hasidut have not. It is probably the fastest growing Hasidic movement in the world today, with about 40,000 people going to Uman, to his grave, every year for Rosh Hashanah. And it's very largely a Sephardic movement. Interestingly enough, I would say that I'd maybe say that at this point, maybe 60–70% of people who identify as Breslover Hasidim are actually of Sephardic origin, of Mizrahi origin. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure, but that's certainly the case. So tonight, rather than talk a lot about Rebbe Nachman, I want to teach some Rebbe Nachman. And I've chosen the teaching that he would have me choose to teach. He very strongly believed that there was one teaching that he taught, which was the single most important thing that he taught. He emphasized that his student, Reb Nassan, who was kind of his secretary and foremost disciple, very, very often would reference this teaching. And if you look at his letters, we have a collection of his letters called Alim L'Trufa, the letters of healing. And if you look at these letters, you see again and again and again, he references this teaching as being kind of the master teaching. The master teaching in two areas, and I actually misadvertised. I said Rebbe Nachman's recipe for happiness. That's true. This is Rebbe Nachman's recipe for happiness. It is also Rebbe Nachman's recipe for good relationships. So it's a kind of a two-for deal, right? We're getting Rebbe Nachman's recipe for relationships and Rebbe Nachman's recipe for happiness. And that's not actually, shouldn't be a surprise, because the thing that makes us most happy in life, I think we can all agree, is our relationships, right? Not just our relationship with others, but certainly our relationship with ourselves too. So we'll be talking about both of those. The teaching that we're going to be looking at is contained in this book, Likutei Moharan, which is the collection of Rebbe Nachman's sermons that was later edited by his student Reb Nassan. And this is number 282. Okay, so if you look in the chat, you'll see in Safari, I've given you a copy of that. I'm going to be reading and translating the Hebrew, and in a loose way, and you're certainly welcome to look at the text. So I'm just going to launch into the text because it's really quite beautiful. So he begins with the word da, no. Whenever Rebbe Nachman begins anything with the word no, he means not like no as in information, but as something that you should take in deep inside of you. This is something that should now become part of the way in which you operate in the world. So, no. Ki tzarich ledun et kol adam l'chaf. You have to judge every single person according to their merit. We often translate as giving the benefit of the doubt, but you're going to need the physical image here. So the physical image is, imagine you have one of those old-fashioned scales, and the old-fashioned scales has two little plates, right? Remember those old-fashioned scales? Has two plates, right? Called here kaf, or spoons. You have the spoon of guiltiness and the spoon of innocence, okay? And so you judge somebody on the side of innocence. So you're going to weight it to the side of innocence. Okay. So now he says, afilu mishahu rasha gamor, even a person who is completely evil. Rabbi Nachman anticipates your question. The question that he knows you're going to ask, he says, wait a second, I have to judge, I have to judge everybody favorably, but there are really horrible people in the world, right? So maybe I don't have to judge them favorably. He says, no, afilu rasha gamor, even a person who's completely evil. Okay, and don't ask the next question. You're gonna, what about? Yes, Stalin, everybody. Okay, so then he explains. Even a person who's completely evil, you have to look and you have to search for some little bit of good. That in that little place, in that small, in that tininess, they're not evil. By doing this, that you find in them some bit of good, and you judge them favorably, says when you find this little bit of good in another person, and you judge them favorably, then you actually bring them to the side of innocence. You actually can take them from this side to this side. You actually move them, right? By finding that little bit of good in them, you actually transform them. And finally, and you're able to bring them to tshuva, you're able to turn them around. Now, if you're a teacher, and I was a teacher for 30 years, and this, I've been very often been asked, what's my philosophy of teaching? This is my philosophy of teaching right here. When you find the good in a child, you can really transform them. And I think it's more obvious when you do the opposite, right? So, for example, and this is one of the stories. I hate telling stories, but okay, I love telling stories, but I know I get distracted. But I'll tell the story anyway. When I was a kid, I was in 4th grade. There's a little boy in my class. On the first day of school, he started to run around the room like a crazy person. And the teacher looked at this kid. I remember his name, Kenny Spiegel. And he went running around the room, and she said, I can see Kenny is going to be a problem. Well, Kenny Spiegel was running around the room because there was a bee in the room, and he was allergic to bees. Okay, he was terrified for his life. He was running around the room, but she didn't know that. All she knew is that he was misbehaving. And just by saying those words, I can see that this kid is going to be a problem. She created a situation in which he actually became a problem. I really believe it was because of those words, because she found something negative in him, or she thought she found something negative, even if it's not real. And by treating him as a negative person, right, she created that situation. So, Rabbi Nachman continues. Takes a verse, beautiful verse from Tehillim, says, in yet a little bit, the wicked man is not. You reflect upon his place, he will not be there. So he takes this verse in a very beautiful way. Va'od ma'at. with just a little bit. The word od just means a little extra, okay? Just a little extra, whatever is left, right? With whatever good is left in a person. It says, if you focus on that, if you reflect on that, hidbonanta al makomo, you look at their actual state, you see who they really are. It says, you look for that rasha, you look for the bad person, and they're not there anymore. They disappear. You've actually transformed them. You've actually changed them, right? That person who you saw before is not there. Now, this thing of hitbonanta l'mokomo, right? That you should to meditate and to really seriously think about somebody else's condition, somebody else's state. And how often do we really do that, right? Very rarely do we actually do that. Right? Normally, most of our interactions with other people are based on superficial impressions. Right? We're not looking for the good in them. We're not even looking for the bad in them. We just know who they are because we met them and there they are. We see their face. We see, somebody looked at me and said, "You look like a serious rabbi." I'm a serious person. I'm actually not such a serious person, but I look like a serious person. Right? We see the outside. But here he's saying himponanta. He says, really pay attention to who this person is before you. He says, and says, "L'duna kol l'chafschut." Now he says, he's answering your question again. Even if you see that they're completely evil, you see they're completely bad, right? You see with your eyes. There's no, as my rabbi used to say, there's no mitzvah to be stupid, right? You're not be stupid. Oh, they must be really great. No, they're not really great. They're horrible. And they're horrible. You can see that they're horrible. He says, even though you can see they're horrible, it says, even though Rasha Gamor, you see they're completely bad. He says, even so, right, you have to search for, he said, and he uses 3 different verbs here, because sometimes it's hard, right? This is not easy. To see the good in another person often is very challenging. And if the person is really bad, it's really challenging. And I as a teacher, I've had students, I admit it, I've had students where I've had real trouble finding something really great about this kid. Like I had to work hard. I've had colleagues and I've had bosses. And I have lots of bosses where it was not always easy, to try to find the good in that person, right? He says, but you have to search and you have to seek and you have to look until you finally find it. And in that place, the person is not bad. In that place and the moment, I think we've all had this experience of encountering a bad person in a good moment, right? And you look at them, who is this person, right? So imagine if at that moment when you're saying who is this person, you're saying, wow, there you are, that's you. This other guy here is, I don't know who he is, but this is you. So he says, va'od ma'at ze'en rasha. He says, and look at the verse, va'od ma'at, and yet a little bit in rasha. You're looking for whatever little bit is still good. Why does it say, why are you using the word od still? Right? He's going to explain. A place in a person's personality where they're still not bad. What does that mean? So we're basically good. Okay, we're basically good. Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, "I'm going to be evil," right? We're basically good, but we do rotten things. We have a big yetzer hara. We do all sorts of terrible things. But there's always some good. And now he explains. He says, "Ki afal pi shehu rasha." Even though a person is completely evil, you can't say that there isn't a little bit of good in them still. You can't say, because it can't say that they never, it's not possible that they never did a mitzvah or a good deed in their entire life. So Rebbe Nachman explains elsewhere, says that when you do a sin, that sin is etched in your bones. It's a scary image, right? Etched in your bones, right? He says, but even though it's etched in your bones, when you do tshuva, it's immediately erased, right? It's washed off, right? Even though it seems to be, even though it becomes part of you, it becomes part of you in this very temporary way, right? It's like, it's like some kind of disappearing ink, right? It disappears. But a good deed and a mitzvah, that creates a reshimu, that creates an impression on your personality, an impression on your soul that can never be taken away from you, right? That can never be wiped out. So you can wipe out your sins with tshuva, but the good deeds, you can't wipe those out. You can sin and sin, do terrible things. Okay, that you have to deal with that. That's real. There's reward and there's punishment and there's consequences and real world consequences, all those things. But they don't erase the mitzvahs and the good deeds that you do. So any person, right, if they've done a good deed in their life, if they've done a mitzvah in their life, then that rishimu, that residue is still there. And that is our ma'atov. That's our little bit of good. And so therefore, if you find that bit of good, right, where they're not evil, and you judge them for their merit, he says, if you do that, then you actually bring them from the side of guilt to the side of innocence. You actually upgrade them. You actually change them and transform them. And he says, be'emet, because don't think you're fooling yourself. Don't think, because the temptation is thinking, well, I'm playing some kind of a mental game here. I'm playing a mental game. A lot of people, when they think about giving the benefit of the doubt, they think it's making up exotic stories, right? So I want to give a person the benefit of the doubt. So I try to imagine that really they're not doing what they're doing and they must really have a good reason for it. And he said, no, that's not emet, okay? That's not truth, okay? It's not going to work. What's going to be truthful is to look and say, well, wait a second, does this person have something which is good about that? Is there something about this person who may be even really bad? Or in this moment, I'm not seeing the good in them. Am I able to see something which is genuinely good in them? And when we do that, he says, Ad yashu b'shuva, you can bring them to tshuva with that. You can actually transform them. So he says, Zehu, and this is the concept, Od ma'at in Rasha. This is the idea of in just a little bit, the wicked man is not there. Okay. So this is this concept, and then he says, we meditate, we reflect upon their place, and they're not there anymore. Hainu. What does that mean? We look at their place and their level, right? They're not where they were before, right? They're not who they were before. Their condition has changed, right? Just by our seeing the good in them and focusing on that good. So when I say seeing the good, I do not mean in a casual way. Okay, I mean we are laser focused on this good, right? We're preoccupied with that good, right? We're just looking at that. We're looking at that good in that person, and we're focused on that good. Bonanta, we're reflecting on it. So we're reflecting on that good. We're really paying attention to it, and And what we find is that we look at where they were before and where they are now, and there's no comparison. We've really managed to change them. Because we have found them a little bit of good. Now he uses a beautiful word, nekuda tova, a point of goodness. And this is a beautiful one because a point, nekuda, right, is something that has no dimension. It has no dimension, right? It has no breadth, right? It has no width, right? It's just a placeholder, right? That's how little this thing can be, right? You might say that imagine a person has a little bit of good, but like they've never developed it. They've never given it any kind of nourishment. They've never cultivated it, right? It's just there. They did something which is good and it had an impact on them, but they just left it there. Okay, even that nikuda tova, and this, by the way, if you ever want to like connect with a Breslov person, all you got to do is go nikuda tova, because that becomes part of everything, right? You're always looking for nikudas tovas. Somebody asks you how something was, you don't want to tell them that was bad. You say nikudas tovas. Yeah, there were good points there. There are good points to be found there. So he says, okay, so we have to, so you have to find this nikuda tova, and you have to judge according to the zechut, right? To the merit. And said again, but emet, truthfully, really, honestly, truly, you take the person and you move them from the side of guilt, side of innocence, you transform them and change them. Now, this is, okay, so far, now we've talked about relationships, okay, dealing with other people. I promise you, okay, I very rarely can make a promise about anything, but I can make a promise. If you try this out at home, okay, in the next 24 hours, I promise you, you will see something amazing, okay? I can guarantee honest to goodness miracles with this one, okay? I guarantee you. I don't do that because it's stupid, but I'm going to tell you that, okay, I guarantee you it will be miracles. Just try this at home. Now, here comes the happiness part. He says, "V'chein," and so, tzarech adam limtzo gam ba'atzmo. Wait, you also have to find this point of goodness in yourself. You also have to find it in yourself. It says, ki zeh yadua. Because it's well known that a person has to be very careful to always be happy, right? And to keep yourself far, far away from sadness. This is very often translated as depression. I do not want to translate it as depression. Depression is often a clinical condition, and this is a kind of sadness or melancholy that relates to the way that we see the world. I mean, it relates to our mentality, not to our neurophysiology. But he says, look, it's very important to be happy, right? Now, I once put on the wall of my classroom, mitzvah gadol liyot b'simcha tamid, and one of my colleagues tore it down. He said, "No, there is no mitzvah to be happy." I said, but wait a second. It says in Tehillim, "Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha," serve God with happiness. And he said, well, we don't make halacha from Tehillim, so he said, "There's no mitzvah to be happy." I think that it's very simple common sense. Imagine that you were a king and you have servants. Do you want to see your servant, slogging through their work, miserable and horrible? Do you want to see them singing and happy? Right? This is an argument. Thank God I'm talking to Sephardim for the most part. I don't need to argue with you about this. You already know about happiness way before anybody ever told you about it. Okay, so Sephardim don't actually have this problem with happiness, but Ashkenazim really do, because we are the saddest, most miserable people on earth. Okay, I'm sorry. We're neurotic, anxious. And so he's really talking part to Ashkenazim, who are always miserable. So he says, it's important to be happy. Now, elsewhere, and I will reveal the secret because it's an important secret. Rabbi Nachman actually says that it's okay to have fun. It's shocking. He said that sometimes, in order to make yourself happy, you actually have to like have fun, like tell jokes and do something stupid. He calls it he calls it milta de shtuta, right? Stupid things, right? It's shtuyot. He says sometimes you have to do stupid things, and that's actually a very I do highly recommend that. Okay, it is a secret that in a pinch, if you really are down, I highly recommend having fun. Now, what he's going to talk about now is I'm going to say is a deeper kind of fun. I'm sorry, a deeper kind of happiness. Okay, fun is there, and I'm not criticizing. I think it has a real benefit, but there's a different kind of happiness he's talking about here. So he says you have to keep away from of sadness as much as possible, as we've explained many times. And really, he did explain this many times. Afilu. Maybe you look at yourself honestly and you say to yourself, I don't have any good in me. You know, I look at myself and I think there's nothing good in me. It says, maybe you see that you're really bad and you're full of sins, and the baldavar, the yetzer hara, right? The baldavar is the yetzer hara, the Satan, wants to make you fall because of this into depression and melancholy, right? The easiest way to get you, right? For the Satan to get you, right? You look at yourself honestly, and you say, right? I'm full of sins. I'm a mess, right? I'm no good. So it says even so, it's forbidden. He doesn't say it's not a good idea. Okay, he says it's forbidden. The reasons why it's forbidden is because melancholy, this kind of sadness it can cause you to give up on yourself. And once you give up on yourself, then you're not going to do anything, right? Your avodat Hashem, your service of God is going to be in the toilet. Right? You're going to give up on yourself. You say, okay, I'm not capable of anything. Can't do anything. Okay, I'm done. So it's asur, it's forbidden to fall into that trap. But instead, you have to look and you have to search and you have to find, again, 3 verbs, because it may not be easy. It's not possible that you didn't do some good deed, that you didn't do some mitzvah in your entire life. It's not possible, right? Somewhere along the line, you had to do something good, no matter how bad you are. And maybe you look at that good thing that you did. Maybe you look and you find that even the good thing that you did is filled with flaws. It has no perfection. It's also not great. Right? Okay, I did a good thing, but it's it was imperfect. Right? Maybe it wasn't imperfect. He says, Hainu, for example, Shiro'eh shegam hamitzvah hadavar shebkedusha shezacha la'asot, hu gam ke'male pinyot machshavot zarot pegamim harbe. Says maybe you see that even the holy thing that you merited to do was full with ulterior motives, external thoughts. You were distracted, you were thinking about other things. Yes, you prayed, but you were thinking about business, or you were still rehearsing that fight with your spouse. Who knows, right? Maybe that's true. Maybe so you're looking at what at even your mitzvahs, and even my mitzvahs suck, they're horrible, right? Even those are a mess, right? So then he says, Im kol zeh, Even in that thing that you did, you can't say that there's no good. As it says, ki al kol panim, no matter how it was, al kol panim, in any case, there has to be some little bit of good point. You can't say that you didn't have a good motive, right? You can't say there was a good motive. I love Nahum Gershon says in the comments, did I correctly hear Ashkenazi are depressed and Sephardic people are happy? Ashkenazi unhappy by and large. Does this mean I have Sephardic genes? Sure, why not? No, I would say it's a generalization, but certainly I think it's realistic. The neuropsychological profile of Ashkenazic Jews is kind of famous for high anxiety. So who knows? Maybe, who knows? Maybe me too, I hope. Okay, I'm 100% Ashkenazi, according to 23andMe, 100%. I was upgraded from 98.6 to 100%. So, okay. So, it can't be that you didn't have a good motive. Really think about it. Maybe I did something, but I gave tzedakah, and I gave tzedakah, and I was looking over my shoulder to see if all my friends were, impressed with me, and I could see they were, and I kind of grooved on that. That was fine, But are you really going to say to yourself that, you didn't for a moment think, wow, I get to give this to God. Oh, wow, I get to give this to the poor. Wow, yeah, of course you did, right? Of course you had a holy motive in there somewhere. Right? If you wanted to impress your friends, there are a lot of different ways to impress your friends. You could have gone out and bought a Lamborghini, parked it right in front of the shul, right? So there had to be some good in it. He says, therefore, a person has to look and has to find a little bit of good. Why? In order to bring yourself alive, right? That's the whole point here. The whole point here is to give yourself life. Your service of God should be full of life. It should be full of, you should be able to invest your full self in it. And if you think you're garbage, you can't invest your full self in it. When you're able to see yourself in this positive light, when you spend time actually focusing on what's positive about you, right, then you're showing up as a person that God might actually want to hear from. It's an incredibly brave and egotistical thing to think that you can stand before God, right? You can stand before God and you can talk to Him. That I can sit at my table right here, and I can lift my cup for kiddush, right? And I'm able to proclaim, right? I'm proclaim the holiness of my Creator, that He created the world. They created the world in 7 days, and He created 6 days, and then He rested on the 7th day, and I'm resting. And this requires me to really think I'm something. Right? If I don't think I'm something, I can't do any of this. I can't really do any of this. I can go through the motions, mannequin, robot. But for me to really be present, I have to think I'm something. And this is, right? And how do I think I'm something? By looking for the bit of good in myself. In order to make yourself alive, to bring yourself to happiness, we said before. He says, and then by looking and finding the little bit of good in you still, and therefore you actually bring yourself. You actually bring yourself from the side of guilt, side of innocence. You actually make yourself better. And you can actually do tshuva. You can actually transform yourself. You can actually return to God. Says, and this is, again, this verse we said before, except now, look a little bit at the wicked man. Is not, he reflects upon his place, he will not be there. Why is he not there anymore? Why are you not there anymore? Because your place has changed. Your madrega has changed, right? Your makom, your spiritual state has changed. Now, I promised myself I'm not going to go more than 45 minutes. I won't do the entire. I won't do the entire thing. And he says, and he makes it continue with an important point. He says that one of the reasons to do this, and to make a practice out of doing this, is partially because people do make mistakes, right? People do make mistakes. And what often happens is our mistakes build up on us and we give up on ourselves, right? And we lose everything. So part of it is this is an opportunity, right, to kind of hold on to whatever it is that we have. Now he continues. So, and I'm going to move out of the text for a second and share two more points that he makes, which I think are important and very deep. So one is, and I think this is beautiful, as he says, that this idea of finding good points, once we find one good point, then we look for another, then we look for another, we look for another. And he says, what is this like? He says, it's like music. He says, how do we make music? He says, well, imagine that there are all these notes in the world. The world is full of sounds. And imagine you select, right, the most beautiful ones. You select the good ones. And then you string them together. You put them together in some kind of meaningful, beautiful pattern. He says, that's what a song is. So he says the same thing is if we start doing this with other people and with ourselves, we start living at the level of azamra, and I will sing. You become, it's like your life becomes a song, right? You're collecting these good points and transforming them into a song. And the last point that I will share before, because I only have a couple, I'm going to give myself a couple of minutes. And I think this is a very good point. That I think it's also a very good point for Magen David. Let me see if I can find it. He's talking about a shliach tzibur, a person who is the leader of the community, and he says, okay, so this is section 20. If you look on the Safari, this is section 21. Da. Shemishi achola asot elo nigunim. A person who is able to make these melodies, right? Hainu laket nekudot tovot shenimtza b'chol echad miYisrael. If you're able to find the good points in all Jewish people, if you're able to find those, right? Afilu haposheh Yisrael, even in the sinner of Israel, right? So he's saying, look, there's a skill. The skill is to be able to find the good in every single person, right? To find this in every single Jewish person, and I say Jewish person here because he says it that way. I would say that really is just in every single person. Here you'll see the context; it'll make sense. And he says, "Afilo poshe Yisrael, even the sinner, hu yachol lehitpalel lifnei ha'amud." That person is the one who should be allowed to pray from the Amud, the person who's allowed to pray on the behalf of the community. Ki shemid palel lifnei Amud, the person who prays on behalf of the congregation, hu nikra shliach tzibor. He's called the shliach tzibor. He's called the representative of the community. Shetzarach yeh nishlach mekol tzibor. He has to be sent from the entire community. Dahainu shetzarach lekabetz kol nekudatova shnimtza b'kol echad shespolin. Says that the person who leads the prayers should be collecting. This is a beautiful thing, right? Collecting all of the good points of all the people who are praying. Imagine that. Imagine you're the shliach tzibur, right? Imagine you're the shliach tzibur, and you are. And you're standing there and you're praying for the congregation, and you look behind you or you look around you and you're seeing the good in every single person in the room, right? And you're bringing that into your tefillah. You're bringing that, you're coming before Hashem, right? And going, look what I got here. Look what I got. Look at this. Look who I brought you, right? Look who's with me, right? It's an amazing thing. He says, and a person do this, all of those things now become included in him. He's able to pray with all of that good. This is what it means to be a shliach tzibur. This is what it means to be the leader of prayer. You have to have this kind of exalted condition. You call Nakudat Ta'avim Alav, and all the points are drawn to him and they're merged inside of Nichal. They're merged inside of him. This is the definition of Jewish leadership. Right? The definition of Jewish leadership is, a person should be able to see the Nekudot Tovot, to see the good points in every single member of the community. And that's my talk. I made it for 45 minutes exactly. I'm very proud of myself. Extraordinarily proud of myself. And,
it was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
We very much appreciate it. I will leave. There was another synagogue in town this week is going to have a presentation. I'll leave the name out of the synagogue, but it's going to be how to talk to your adult children. So I have 2 adult children, and this will be a most helpful presentation for me to deal with them. But because I have to. Got to remember to always look for the good. I appreciate that very much.
Okay.
You open it to any questions?
Okay. I just want to address something in the chat. I have a message here from Nachman. I'd be very happy to talk to you. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, I'm unable to copy from the chat. So if you just contact anybody else who knows me, I'm very happy to talk to you. Or if you have Facebook, you find me there. Lee Weissman, you'll be able to find me. I'm happy to talk to you. Okay, questions, please.
Is the talk recorded?
Yes,
I believe it is, yes.
Thank you.
Thoughts?
Avraham, this is Erin. I have a question. How do you in the moment deal with a person who's really nasty?
Okay. First, you put on your flak jacket. Put on your raincoat, your spiritual raincoat, because of course you want to protect yourself, so that you're not, you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to be hurt. But then try and I know it's hard. I follow Rebbe Nachman's advice. Try as hard as you can to look underneath whatever is coming at you to find the good in it, to find the good in that person. And if you're, and while the person is, I've done this many times, while the person is being horrible to you, look at them as best as you possibly can, as the best person that you know that they can be.
Does that apply to every person, even a goy, or just Jews?
I think it applies to every single person. Honestly, it applies to every single person. I've never seen it fail. I've never seen it fail. I've seen me fail many times. I've never seen it fail.
Including Hitler?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. I think Rebbe Nachman is. Look. I asked exactly this question of my rabbi, and my rabbi's answer was, he said, Hitler was not a human being. He was a special creation of the Satan. He's a robot, right? So maybe not Hitler, because maybe he was a robot. But if Hitler was human, yes. And by the way, I mean, it is, I should point out that the wording in Pirkei Avot is Kitzarech Ladun et Adam, every human being, right? He uses the word Adam. I think that the I think that that's and Rabbi Nachman continues that language throughout the entire thing. So I would say any person.
So with this concept,
Yes.
looking at the single dot of goodness in anybody, where is the room for trying to influence people for improvement, or where's the other side of this? In other words, if you focus on the single dot of goodness, how can you make that dot bigger and bigger and bigger? So
well, that's a great question. So my experience is like this, that when you focus on that little dot, right? And by the way, it's like any other thing. When you focus on it, it actually becomes bigger. I mean, that's kind of your experience. It becomes bigger, right? But once you focus on it, and you've now made that person you've now helped that person move a little bit in that direction, then there's an opening, right? One of the reasons why Musar doesn't work very well, right? That is, Musar is our, criticism, right? And, it would be nice if Musar, there's deeper meanings of Musar, but I mean as criticism. One of the reasons why criticism doesn't work well is because people shut down, right? So I walk up to somebody and I go, you, right? They shut down, they don't hear anything, they don't move. Once the person is opened, right? You've opened them, right? You've seen the good in them. You're engaging in that good in them, and then you're saying, and then the way you deliver the message is also going to be different. I love, Abraham Twersky used to say that his father would correct him by saying nishpashnis. He said, "This is, for a good boy like you, this is not the way for a good boy like you. You'll start saying, for a person who can be like this, this doesn't make sense for you, So your way of approaching the person is going to change, and so the openings will be there, and those conversations will be a lot more fruitful."
if I may follow, because this. The concept is really one that focuses on your perception of the person.
Yes.
That person may continue to be who he or she is, good or bad or whatever.
They will.
But your perception of that person is something that you have to work on changing. But that doesn't make that person improve.
Well, Rebbe Nachman's promise is that it will. I mean, and that's the kind of weird part about this. I mean, is that yes, it's about changing your perception, absolutely. Even your perception of yourself. But it's also, he says, that it has a transformative effect on the people that you do it to, including yourself. So I would just try it. I mean, this is very few things in Judaism do I say, well, would I ever say, oh, just try it out, see how it goes, and you'll see I'm right. Okay, I can 100% say, you try it out, see how it goes, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You'll say, Avraham, the idiot sits next to me. Okay, but I'm pretty sure it will. If you try it out, it'll work. This is definitely try it at home.
Could you speak to how this works in sustained relationships, having a difficult boss or spouse or next door neighbor for 10 years, 20 years? I think the sustaining effect is it's nice to do it for once or twice or 3 times.
Yeah, well, ideally speaking, it should become a regular part of the way that you deal with the world, and kind of as a natural part of the way that you think. I mean, of course, we know, that we know that we have I don't know what they call neuroplasticity, right? We know that our brains can be rewired in all sorts of wonderful ways, and this is one of the ways, right, that we make it a habit. So for example, Breslover Hasidim have the practice of trying to spend an hour every day in Hidbodedut, in secluded prayer. And part of that is actually looking for the good points in yourself, right? So if you're doing that every single day, then that becomes kind of part of your routine, right? So, when I meet a person, I'm scanning for a Nikudot Tovot. It sounds a little weird, but that's what's happening, right? And when you're dealing with your kid or dealing with your spouse, now it's not easy. Okay, please don't think that I'm trying to say that it's easy. It's difficult, especially when you already have stuff, right? When you have a lot of stuff built up and you have a lot of inner resistance, it's really not easy. But nevertheless, it's still good advice. Good advice is good advice, even if it's hard to keep.
But over a long period of time, you might come up with, say, a boss or a neighbor. You might come up with 3 or 4 nikadot, But what if it's 10 years and you only found 3,
My experience is that people surprise you. Like when you start looking for them, you actually do find them, and you're surprised. You're really surprised. Some of the most awful people I've ever met have had some really beautiful nikudot.
Could you give an example of something you've seen like that?
Yes. I had a student once, who was just horrible. I don't know how to describe it. It's just horrible in every possible way that a person could be a horrible student, horrible to talk to, just horrible. And I really struggled, and I was trying very hard. And there was we had a retreat kind of a thing, and the kids had made a fire, and they were throwing things into the fire, and somebody threw a fire extinguisher into the fire. Now, if that's an explosion waiting to happen. And it was really dangerous. And this kid threw himself into the fire, right? He threw himself into the fire and pulled this thing and pulled this thing out. I mean, the thing is burning hot, right? And he saved everybody. Then the kids kind of went crazy. They were trying to break into an office. He stood in front of the office and stopped them, single-handedly. And I realized that this was a kid who was just a super rugged individualist. He was never going to do what anybody else told him to do. But that also meant that he was also intensely brave, brave in ways that I could never be. And once I saw that in him, my relationship with this kid completely changed. I still have a relationship with him today. And I see he has become this amazing person. He's a great person, right? But I didn't see any of that. I didn't see anything.
Yeah, that's a great story.
And very often, I'll also tell you a secret. Very often, the worst thing about a person will turn out to be the best. Like in this case. This guy was right against everything, and that was his Nikudat Tova.
I have a question. Could you take the same concept and apply it? Let's say you're having trouble with a group, whether it's a office instead of just a boss, but it's 5 or 6 people that work in your office, and the setting is just, to your vantage point, feels like it's really difficult.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, think about that, because social situations have their own dynamics. And then because you end up, you have the kind of the spiritual state of the individual, and then you have the spiritual state of the group. And very often the spiritual state of the group is different. It's not the sum of the spiritual state the spiritual state of the group is not the sum of the state of the individuals in it. It's something else, which I don't necessarily understand. So I have to think about that, because there is something different that goes on in groups. I'm not sure. But certainly with the individuals in that group, I think, of course, you can accomplish a lot just by focusing on them and focusing on their Nikudot Tovot.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Does anybody else have any questions for Avraham?
I have a comment, if I may.
Yes.
It seems to me that nowadays there is a strong emphasis on happiness concerning the Breslov Chassidim.
Yeah.
And, especially with Rabbi Nachman, to the point that normally when people think about the Breslov Chassidim, they imagine them dancing in the streets of Israel with the lorry, with the van. And it's interesting. However, it seems to me that one aspect that is very unfortunately forgotten was that Rabbi Nachman made a huge emphasis in terms of studying Torah and studying all aspects of Torah, including the aspect of not just the written and the oral Torah, but also the halachot, to the point that he mentioned that studying halakha, even if somebody does not have time, and even if somebody believes himself to be a rasha, and does not even, should we say, act according to the letter of the halakha, that he should not, for any reason, not study at least one halakha a day. And it seems to me that that is an aspect that is normally forgotten. Yes, I mean, he was emphasizing happiness, but for him, happiness in its full extent of the word meant the happiness of being able to study Torah and to be able to delve into all of its aspects in terms of Torah, the Arba'a Isrim, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Zohar, the Halakha.
Right. Yeah. So I don't at all. I chose this because it was his. I chose this because it was what he would choose. I mean, in the sense that he considered this to be his most important teaching, and Reb Nosson considered it the most important teaching. It's like, if there's one thing that you can teach, this is the thing to teach. But yes, of course. I mean, Rabbi Nachman, when he says that you enliven yourself, he means enliven yourself in order to study Torah and to do mitzvot, for sure. And when it comes to, and maybe, I don't know, if we decide, I don't know, I'm certainly very happy to do this class. I could do every week. But one of the subjects that Rabbi Nachman talks about, of course, learning halakha, he says that that the world is a very gray place. Okay, imagine the world is a very gray place. Good, bad, right, wrong are all kind of mixed up. So he says when a person studies halakha, and when I say halakha, I mean straight, the codes. He says you study Shulchan Aruch, right? You study the codes of Jewish law. Once you study Jewish law in the black and white of it, it now adds a spirit of clarity into the world and into your world. And so it's recommended, of course, that a person should learn the codes every day. Should learn Shulchan Aruch. I mean, Shulchan Aruch, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Ben Ish Chai is also very good. At least 2 halachot a day, but just to make sure that in this very gray world that you also connect to the black and white, to the black and white of right and wrong in Jewish law every day, along with your hitbodedut. Really, the only 2 things. Rabbi Nachman is very, there's not much to Breslov Chassidut, right? Hitbodedut, talking to God, making sure that you learn halakha, and of course learning as much Torah as you possibly can, and praying and trying to really pray.
And Avraham, we have a question from Phyllis Wells. If she'd like to go ahead and ask it.
Sure.
No, I have no question. Thank you.
Okay, you had a raised hand. Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. If anybody has more questions for me, I'm very easy to find. I can find me in the back of the shul, or you can find me on Facebook or Twitter or any of those things. I'm very happy to answer any questions. And
My wife actually has one more question.
yes.
So Avram, he died at 39. I mean, I know he was the descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, but how did he learn so much in such a short time?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I do not know. He was clearly, quite a remarkable genius. It's interesting. I always tell people that he was the, great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, but he didn't really like that. I don't think he very much saw himself as being, he didn't have a lot of faith in heredity. And so, he basically said about himself, whatever I am is what I made myself. He learned a tremendous amount of Torah. I mean, his suggestion, we talk about learning Torah. His student, Reb Nassan, used to read 7 pages of Talmud a day. Okay, he used to fit and finish the entire Shulchan Aruch with commentary every year. So if you can kind of imagine, so 7 pages a day means he would finish the Talmud every year. So he would do the entire Talmud every year.
Wow.
And so you can imagine what Rebbe Nachman's learning regimen was like.
Thank you very much, Avraham. And if no one else has any questions, we thank you, everybody, for turning out.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. If I made any mistakes, I promise they're only my mistakes. God is perfect. His Torah is perfect. Rebbe Nachman's not perfect, but he's pretty close. And if I've made any mistakes, certainly they've all been mine. So please hope you forgive me, and I hope you got something out of this that will be good. Change it, and that you can try at home.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
All right.